Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to our live on social events. And we are going to have a good time today because we are going to be discussing supply chain attacks with my good friend and colleague, one Mr. Ben Finke. We will bring him in and let him introduce himself. Mr. Ben, how's it going, sir?
Oh, fantastic to be here. It's nice to be live. Good always to make sure that we're still alive. How you doing today?
I'm doing not too bad, man. I really enjoy the old cyber thing that we do here, and I really enjoy when we get to do it together because, man, the first time we got to work together, we just had so much fun, and then we had a couple of conference calls and talking about stuff, and we had a lot of fun. So I really enjoy hanging out with you and getting to talk cyber stuff because, dude, you're wicked smart. You know a lot about what's going on in this industry. So it's just great to have you as a resource to bring you on and get to pick your brain, learn about stuff that we need to know as cybersecurity professionals or people that want to get into cybersecurity. We know we can go straight to the source, someone who has not only lived it, done it, and now has is making a business out of it. That's a great thing. So we really appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us and answering questions.
For sure.
And make sure that everybody out there knows that there will be a time you're going to get to ask Ben some questions. So get them ready. We're going to kind of start the thing off here because little birdie told me you wrote an article about supply chain attacks. And we're like, that is a smart thing because they are starting to become like a real problem. So if Ben's writing articles about it, that means he's got some of the insights on it. He's got some of that inside baseball that we need to know about. So let's start off with just something very simple, like supply chain attacks. Explain to me what they are and why people should care about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just trying to keep up myself. So really looking forward to the questions folks are going to ask here in a little bit. So supply chain attacks has been on our radar for a few years now, something we've been thinking about certainly for a while, but has really in the last probably 18 months become top of mind for a lot of folks because well, it involves a lot of different things. But in the simplest example I can point to, there are so many times when the exact tool we're relying on to keep us safe and allow us to protect our environments, our networks, our clouds, whatever they are, turn into the thing that is attacking us, right? And what's so insidious about it, what we see over and over again, is that because these tools are we're relying on them to help protect us, they get put everywhere with lots of permissions, lots of privileges, lots of authority, and usually they get totally whitelisted by the company. So, we'll go in and we'll start talking about, hey, what kind of PowerShell activity do you see in your Windows environment? And like, oh, we have all this stuff. I'm like, what about all these other things here? Like, oh, no, 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 that's part of our fleet management tool. We've whitelisted all that. We don't want that cluttering the screen, which is fine if that thing is doing its job. But if somebody else is telling it what to do, all of a sudden it means like the thing that you have bought to do the work is now, in the hands of your attacker, which is never good. So um, we wrote that because there's so much. I mean, supply is everywhere. It's been the main focus of a lot of the new like cybersecurity strategy coming out of the White House, and there's I think a lot of like just like a lot of terms in cybersecurity, there's a lot of like people putting different meanings into it, and it hits on a lot of layers, right? And so we actually started. So that first article hit. It was kind of an overview. We've got some more coming out that dive into more of the layers in there, but yeah, there's so much to it, Daniel. Well, so you guys must get questions about that too, right? I mean, you're talking about because it's in the news
It's in the
constantly.
news, obviously. Like, and I think that you made reference to this, the whole entire SolarWinds thing that happened, which
Mm.
turned out to be a giant. Oh, we'll just call it a storm of.
We'll use a different
Yeah,
example because
yeah.
their lawyers are very litigious and
Are
they
they
like
really?
to anytime that comes up. So we're going to use a different
You
example
can't even
today.
bring. I mean, it's in the news. You can't even bring
Oh
up a
man,
news.
if you,
Wow.
I'm just going to say, be very well sourced and be prepared to defend anything you're going to say about
Gotcha,
that one.
gotcha, gotcha. Well, we appreciate the
Yeah,
heads up.
yeah.
No one here wants to go and stand before any
No,
kind of legal mechanism over just
no.
talking about the news. So we'll dip away from that. But well, let's just say there was a company called I don't know. We'll say Bob's Hats, and Bob's
Right.
Hats is
Yeah,
used by like government entities to source their hatting needs
exactly.
out. And so basically, a supply chain attack is where a APT or state sponsored threat gains access into Bob's Hat's source
Mhm.
code, their systems, their network, and they're able
Yeah.
to basically embed their malicious code into the trusted code. And that's why you're over here talking about whitelisting applications,
Mhm.
where if I am now a user of Bob's Hats code goes into my network. It's all
Mhm.
trusted. I'm whitelisting anything it does so that I'm not getting constantly alerted by why is Bob's Hats doing PowerShell commands? Well, because Bob's Hats needs to do PowerShell commands. So this is why it's so insidious, right? Is because it is embedded under the surface, and I think you were talking about this as well. It's really really difficult unless they make themselves very well like known, like, hey, here's some ransomware, and start paying me, or they do a giant attack based off of the fact that they have access to those customers. They just kind of fly under the radar pretty well with this, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so there's a bunch of layers to this. So let's talk about that example where you have a finished software product that you buy. When you purchase the software from Bob's Hats, most of the time, and I won't speak for Bob's Hats specifically, but I'll say most of the time, you don't even get a software bill of materials, which is literally all of the components that go into that piece of software. But we know all of these applications, nobody's writing all of these libraries from scratch. Everybody, whatever language they're building these things in, there's all these other open source or commercial libraries that they're buying. Well, when you buy that finished package, in addition to the finished package, you're kind of assuming all of that other stuff that goes underneath. So, in the case of a Bob's Hats getting their software somehow contaminated with some malware, there's lots of opportunity for that to go wrong, right? They could the threat actor, whoever's trying to do this, could simply gain access to one developer's workstation and then just simply modify code that they are contributing back into the source code, right? Or maybe install a library that's not supposed to be there. They could, if they know enough about the software, figure out the different libraries they're using, especially if these are open source libraries. So many places we go, and I know that our dev team would fall into this habit, and so we really had to work through it. It was you would like, I need a widget that does this. And so whatever language you're working in, JavaScript or whatever, so you go find it. And it turns out, sure enough, somebody's written a library that lets you do this thing that you're like, oh, great, I don't have to write this myself. So npm install name of thing. We don't even know where it came from. Nobody's once looked at the source code. It just says, it tells us if a number is odd or even, which is great because for some reason we need to do that. And we don't want to write that ourselves. And all of a sudden, the people who manage that thing, let's say they were very well intentioned, this library, the odds evens library. They're very well intentioned. They want to do the right thing, but they do this as an open source project that they don't get paid for, that they do on their spare time, whatever. So they get tired of all these people sending them complaints about stuff in the software. So they kind of abandon it. And then somebody approaches them, say, hey, I'd like to take over managing that project for you. They say that it's dead. You don't have any time. We'll take over. They're like, great, here you go. Well, now whatever this new person decides to do with this library, everybody who uses the odds evens library just got whatever they're going to put into their thing, right? And so there's so many layers to the supply chain that we run into. But in the case of a finished product, you have complete like black box from your perspective. You have no visibility into what this thing is supposed to do, what it's made of, what is normal. In the case of some of these backdoors, what we see is like they get their code in there and they do very slow outbound connections to a command and control channel, basically something. Well, that's at least something we can take a look at, right? So it's not normally supposed to do that. But that this is where we get into the really the hard part of trying to figure this out, because now you have to, in addition to looking for alerts from direct attacks, now you got to start like, it's basically like suddenly not trusting anybody in your family at your house, right? And looking around all the time like, are you trying to steal my stuff?
They're the
Like,
mafia at this point.
yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
Joey, why
So
are
now
you
all of a sudden
asking
you got
so
this
many
problem.
questions all of a sudden?
Yeah, like, well, everybody's got these questions, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have this situation where it's like, well, what am I supposed to do, right? Like, I'm trying to keep all these people out that are attacking me anyways, and then all of a sudden, the things that I have are turning into werewolves right in front of me and like attacking me from the inside. Um,
Our
I
organization, so if I was Bob's Hats and it was my job to obviously keep my code base safe and make it available for people and then they can trust that they can use it, do companies, do you find this to be, in your experience, that are they doing their due diligence about basically testing their own software, doing SAST and DAST testing so that they can tell whether or not there has been a problem and they need to go like basically threat hunting? Are they threat hunting their own stuff?
Yeah, well, and that's exactly what we're starting to see, right? The idea that like every check that whenever you contribute code, we're going to take a look at what the contribution was and make sure that fell within the realm of like, if you're pulling a thing down because you're going to work on this function and 800 lines of code got added, like that's weird. Why did you have to add 8 lines of code when all we asked you was make the window 4 pixels wider? And so stuff like that is starting to happen. We're seeing more of that code compilation. We're also seeing a lot of like sort of source integrity checking, where if you are bringing in third-party libraries, which is totally fine, right? I mean, one of the great advances in programming, modern programming, is this idea like I can write a library and then I can use it all in my code. Other people can use it. Nobody has to go back and reinvent how to do this thing. But you want to make sure that this came from the authentic organization that you believe it did, and that wasn't tampered on the way, and all that stuff. So a lot of those are coming in. The Open Source Software Foundation actually is doing a lot of great work in this regard. They have something called like code mobility and some other things. They're like, it's 10 things that every open source project needs to do to make it like ready for use and other places. And it's stuff that like, it kind of talks about building a sustainable model, but things like software bill of materials, all of the testing you're talking about, like trusted sourcing for your external libraries and things, are all stuff in there. And it actually applies really well to commercial software. So if you are a developer of commercial software and you want to know that the guidance in there, almost all of it translates really perfectly. But I mean, it's about when the code is written by the developers, when they commit it into whatever their repository is for the code, doing some checking there, doing all checking, and then when you do the build checking, doing so. Most of the security scanning that we see, the software analysis, like the source code, and the dynamic analysis, where you like build a version of it and you let it run, and then some robot hacks at it like with the best that it can. Those do a pretty good job of finding like vulnerabilities in your code, but they don't always find the hidden like backdoors. So we're starting to see some other developer eccentric things where we're looking at like making sure we can attribute the different code modules to the things that they do. And also, I think something we're going to start seeing more often, at least I hope we do, based on some of the new documentation that's coming out. We'll see how they actually implement it. But some idea that if I'm Bob's Hats and I sell you a thing that helps you manage your Windows servers, I should be able to give you a list of things that my software will never do. That would be direct things that if I were an attacker, I would absolutely want to do, like directly call to the internet
Yeah,
to ask
to
for
me, that was like
C2
the
keys,
number
right?
one thing. If I'm like,
Yeah.
if I'm running my own code base and I'm just watching it, and all of a sudden I go, "What is that network traffic there? Where is that
Yeah.
going?
Where
That
is that
seems like
going,
a
right?
problem."
Exactly. Yeah.
Like we might have a problem on our hands here, people. Let's do something about it. So that's kind of where my mind was going with that. Was are they looking to see, is it doing anything outside of the realm of what they know it should be doing? To your point, these are things that they should never do, and all of a sudden,
Mhm.
I've noticed an uptick in things it should never do. Is never seems a lot shorter than I remember.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So that said, very interesting stuff. I love supply chain stuff just because of, I say I love it. It's horrible. It's like
Oh,
all these
yeah.
bad things that are happening, but it's ingenious, insidious, all at the same time. So we've got questions. As you know, we do love to field the questions here. We like to get your input out there. So if you got a question, pop it in our chat, whatever social you're watching on, pop it in the chat and give it to us. We've got one here from Kevin, who comes from Facebook. He is asking, who is responsible when cyber attacks hit a company? Should chief executives be held responsible? Mm,
Ooh, well, that's a
yeah.
great question, Kevin. So I don't know if we'll ever get it to the point where like the chief executives are held accountable from like a legal perspective. I do think what we'll see, and this was the draft guidance that dropped on March 2nd from the new White House cybersecurity strategy, was an idea that you would make a service provider or a software developer company more liable, not in a like criminal sense, but in like a civil litigation sense, where if I buy some software from Bob's Hats and it happens to be like a VPN appliance, and the whole purpose of me buying this thing is I don't want to have anything on the internet that's insecure, but I want to have a way for my employees, partners, whatever, to be able to connect to the environment remotely securely. And it turns out Bob's Hats VPN appliance is loaded with remote code execution vulnerabilities. And that's how people got into my network, that ultimately Bob's Hats gets to share some of the pain of the burden of that impacting my organization. Now, listen, we're going to get into all kinds of things there about proving that that was the way that they came in and all this other stuff, but it's at least a start, because today they don't really share that burden, right? Like if they sell a thing and it happens to be vulnerable, they just say, listen, we do our best, we release patches, they should have patched it even if it's not a patchable thing. um, I think we're going to see some of that. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where the chief executives are held accountable. That would be some hardcore litigation. I think if that's going to happen, we'll see it happen in Europe first, is my guess, and then it might trickle into here, maybe a few states, and then will have to be enacted nationally. But not from probably not criminal. Now that now if they're willingly knowing that they're like selling people's data and there's all this other stuff happening, that might be a totally different story. But if your network happens to have a vulnerability, especially one of these supply chain things that was like a very an honest to goodness advanced attack, I don't think we'll see that in the near future.
Yeah. Anybody that's watched any episodes of the Darknet Diaries or listened to them, I guess is the better
Right.
phrase, is where, a lot of times they'll have that news footage. You hear the audio in the background of maybe not chief executives, but at least like, CISOs and whatnot that are answering questions before a committee of some
Oh,
kind. And they're saying, we did the best we can. And
right.
that is an interesting conversation to have, because we've seen probably all the big dogs out there get hacked.
Hmm.
So, and they've got, I mean, Apple's $1 trillion company last time I checked, and they've been hacked. So how are they not spending enough? How do we make a hard and fast rule, like this is how much of your profit you should be spending on cybersecurity, and you must be doing these things and you must be doing those things? How much regulation can we put in? And as we both know, regulation does not mean secure, right? It
Yeah.
just means you are compliant with the regulatory thing.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
see a lot of people get a false sense of security because of that. Going, I checked all my boxes, all my regulatory and compliance needs are done. I can check that off. We are secure. And if I have to go before a judge because something happens, I can just show them that nice piece of paper that says we are compliance. So,
Yeah.
I mean, security is hard. It's
So
really
hard,
hard.
right?
There's so many little weird things that could go wrong that you just cannot foresee until
Yeah.
someone decides, I'm going to break into that company and I have the skills to do so. So I'm just going
Yeah.
to take my time until I find the thing that they forgot, and then
Yeah.
I'm in. That's why security is so hard. Somebody was talking to me about blue teaming versus red teaming one time. I was like, I do not envy a blue teamer's job at all.
Oh man, it's so hard,
It's
right?
so hard.
And I'm not sure you could even use the money spent as a good metric because we've definitely seen places that spend tons of money on security and have not a good program, and then other places that are very tight budgeted and actually do a great job. So something that we've actually started doing is something called threat informed pen testing.
Mm,
So in a traditional pen test, what happens is you pick. There's a few different differentiators you can do, but by and large, there's two kinds of pen tests. There's the kind where whoever's hiring us tells everybody we're coming, and it's not a secret. And the point is to test a lot of things as quickly as we can. We're going to make some noise. Everybody knows we're there, but they're not trying to stop us. They just want to see, is this thing vulnerable to whatever, right? And if you get in, what can you do afterwards? And that can be, very, very fun. Then there's another kind of test where we don't tell anybody we're coming. And the whole point is not only how resilient are the systems against an attacker, but can the team use all these things we spent all this money on to find us? And plenty of times, and listen, I think the team's very good. I'm very proud of them. They work super hard. They're very, very innovative. But I mean, I can't think that we're that good that we just keep, being able to get the level of success we do just because we do it all the time. And the folks we're testing do it like once a year if they're lucky, right? So,
yeah.
so we had this idea of something called threat informed pen testing. I did a webinar with it with some other folks a couple months ago, but something we're starting to do now that we offer on top of a traditional pen test or as a standalone engagement if you want, where instead of just doing the thing that happens when the pen tester arrives and they do stuff they're comfortable doing that they know how to do, we actually look at how do threat actors actually work? Like where do they actually get in? What do they actually do? And we will replicate that exactly with the customer. And so now you can start to see like rather than it's sort of like the analogy I keep coming back to is like in sports. Like if you were getting ready to play, let's say football, and you knew there was a team that threw the ball all the time and then you signed up a practice team to get ready for that game, but all they do is run the ball. It's technically still football, but it's not going to get you ready for the game, right? So our thought is let's do the things that we know threat actors actually do, help you figure out like, are we able to prevent as much as we can? And the stuff that we can't prevent, do we get enough telemetry in that it would like light up and our team would know somebody's trying to do this and this exactly looks like what a threat actor would do. Let's go knock it down, right? And so by doing it that way, we get a chance to help show them like maybe this is where you've spent money before, but it doesn't matter because that's not a threat that really is in your threat model. These are things that are facing your industry or facing you or that you're worried about. And it turns out like, so a good example, a lot of companies will spend a lot of money on network access control, right? Which can be super efficient. If you have like a big open campus, like a university or a hospital, probably makes sense because you're probably going to get unauthorized people walking all over the place trying to like jack in and do stuff. And you don't want that in your environment. But if you are like a lot of organizations now that are mostly remote work and you're going into like what's left of the office and putting in network access control, but you have like no logging on your VPN solution. Well, like groups like Lapsus, they don't even bother exploiting things. They just find somebody in your company that they can pay to get access to their username and
I've
password.
seen the
They
advertisements.
log in. Yeah, exactly.
They
They log into
legit
the
like
VPN.
add, "Hey, we're looking for Lapsus
Yeah,
workers. Anybody want to
yeah,
be a
exactly,
Lapsus?"
right? And so now they're logged in to your VPN as a real user doing stuff. They don't have to exploit anything, right? They're just moving around. Like, would you know how to like a
And
lot of places, they can't track that back. If like I told them like, hey, last week somebody that was logged into your VPN did a bunch of bad stuff. Could you track it down? The answer is they can't.
yeah, and I
And
love the
that's
idea of
the problem.
that tailor-made pen test that we're going to see who's going to be the most likely threats toward your organization, and let's emulate that so that you can get and the results that come into your report are going to be very tailored to what you need to do to defend yourself. So that
That's
just makes
exactly right.
total sense that that's how you would start doing the thing. So it's just, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
surprised that Ben Fink, it was one of the first pioneers in this because I know you all too well. You're thinking about stuff like that all the time. Thinking about stuff. We got another question coming from Raul. I do love your name, Raul. I just think that is the coolest name in the world. He's
Mhm.
got a question coming from YouTube. He says, how can we assess vendor and business partner security postures other than just looking at SOC 2 reports or 27001-2 certs?
So if we could answer Raul's question definitively, we could retire as billionaires in a couple of years, right? I mean, this is the question.
Yep.
Um, I think what we're probably going to start to see, hopefully in the near future here, is more organizations. Oh, so another thing aside from supply chain, they talked about um, in that cybersecurity draft, and I keep going back to it because I think it's really going to help. Like, if we're going to do this, we have to figure out a way to do this all together, right?
Mm.
One of the things they talked about was better sharing of information about attacks going on and kind of figuring out ways that we can talk about, like, hey, we got attacked. Here's what we were seeing. Here's what we did. We need help. Doing these other things. I think we're going to get to the point where those resources that Raul mentioned are all about policy and procedure for the most part. There's almost nothing performative in them, right? So, like for example, in a SOC 2 assessment, you'll have something like if a piece of malicious software were to end up on a computer, it would be identified and removed. And the way you prove it is you show like whatever endpoints they sample that they're running like an antivirus program. You show that the definitions are up to date. You maybe show a console showing like, yeah, well, in the past we've done that, but you never have a thing like, I'm going to put a piece of malicious software on this computer and I want to see how long it takes for that thing to get removed, right? So that's a lot of what we try to get to is like the performative like testing to show I have a security control that is supposed to prevent this from happening. Let's exercise it. And then that is the result of the audit. I think if we could do that more, where we're looking for like the outcome based of like performative testing as opposed to like attestation, which is what both of those things are, I think we could get a lot closer to it, right? Because most of that is like, do you have a policy that says you remove user accounts after somebody leaves? And the answer is yes, and it looks great, and you get through the audit, and then you could really go and you find out like there's this whole other OU in their Active Directory environment that has all these accounts that haven't changed passwords in 8 years. How do they get through a SOC 2, right? And it's all about scoping and a bunch of other nonsense.
Well,
But I think that's it, right? If we could come up with a performative standard,
I was going to say
I think that would go a long way.
this takes us kind of back to the conversation we were just having a moment ago about yes, you checked your boxes. You did the
Right.
things that they told you should be doing. Do I have antivirus? Yes, I do. But as you're saying, is the antivirus turned on most of the time? Is it up to date? Is it doing the thing that it
Right.
should be doing? And if so, prove it. Right.
Right. Yeah,
Put your money
exactly.
where we are. Like as I like to say, we are Missouri. Show me.
Ah, show me. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Show me that it's doing the thing. Don't just tell me that it's happening. And yes, I can look and see that it is on, but that doesn't mean it's actually
Yeah.
effective.
Well, and I mean, you get to try a lot of different things. I mean, that like it's not like antivirus is one singular like universal commodity thing. There is vast differences between different kinds, right? So,
Hmm.
anyway, so I think if we could get to that kind of a standard where we had a test case or a certification for an organization that did that, and there's some good like models, maturity models for things like threat hunting for organizations. If we could come up with a way to maybe like standardize that and have an entity that could help pump those things out. I mean, you want to get away from just like attestation based things. You want to like perform that, it's almost like the difference between describing a fire drill and actually having a fire drill and realizing like, hey, there's no door for that side of the building. Everybody had to walk over here, right? You don't know until you try it.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can't wait till the Threat Hunters framework comes out, and then we can all go by
Mm,
that. Right, it'll be a lot of fun. All right, got another question from LinkedIn this time. It comes from Lauren. Let's see here. Question is, what can an organization do to protect themselves from a supply chain attack? Great question.
yeah, another pretty loaded one. Uh,
Yeah,
I
all the
think
security things.
So let's do it in a couple different ways. So let's say that you are a company that develops software. I think the biggest thing you need to do today is figure out how to secure your own pipeline of like when software gets written all the way to when it gets deployed. Because the one that we won't talk about, I mean, one of the realities is like a lot of these times, like the attackers put their malicious code in with the rest of it, and then it gets pushed out through the company's own update servers. So not only are they handling distribution or like, the getting it installed, they're handling distribution for you, right? And so we need to worry about that. But I think we also need to worry about like, do we know what's in all this software? I mean, literally putting together a software bill of materials is new to a lot of customers. We walk in when we do consulting on like software as a service type companies and those sort of things is like preparing a software bill of materials that is truly up to date and includes any cloud components or other things that they use in delivery, right? So I think that is something that if you produce software, this should be top of mind for you. If you are a consumer of packaged software, I would say what you probably need to do is game this out in like a tabletop exercise scenario where you say like we are going to assume that this piece of software that we use to manage all of our stuff suddenly is against us. How are we going to like contain it and replace it? And then how are we going to handle going around and looking at what happened and then figure out like where those gaps are, right? I think one thing that we talk about for a lot of software, a lot of our customers when we're talking about software, finished software they buy, that's part of their stuff is rather than whitelist broadly, like anything that happens by this agent or whatever, is is look at the activity that occurs because there's a good chance there'll be a regular recurring pattern to it, and it will be something like that you can expect, and move that way down the priority list, right? So you're not generating a lot of alerts and flooding your SOC with that. But that way, as soon as they do something weird, so like for example, create a local user account, which they've never done before, that's a thing that we should alert on and be like, why is it doing that, right? Or if it's beaconing out to the internet randomly at a site that has nothing to do, with what it is. I think maybe that's the thing I'll say is, if you aren't a developer of software, which may not be very many companies these days, but if you are just a consumer of finished software goods, you should know every machine that needs to go to the internet and why, right? Because there's a good chance that most of your servers should not.
Yeah.
And then if you can go from there. So building that baseline is probably the most critical thing, which requires a lot of logging and telemetry.
Yeah. Well,
And that kind of gets us into the full
that sounds like a lot
conversation.
of work there, Ben. And
Oh
we're gonna need
man.
you to slow down and just be a little more calm, trying to get us to do a
Hmm.
lot of stuff to like
Hmm. Hmm.
telemetries and things of that nature.
You,
It's just
you know what we
it's
could
crazy fun.
do? We could just turn them all off.
Yeah. And it'd be
Just turn them
fast
all
too.
off.
Super
That would work.
fast, when we don't gotta
Yeah.
go through those logging systems and
Yeah.
I can just
That's
watch
right.
YouTube all
Oh
day.
man.
All right. Well, that is like you said, it's a really difficult question to answer. If we another one, if we knew the exact right answer to, we would retire as millionaires very, very shortly from now.
Yes.
But we must move on. We have another question, this time from Kelly. Kelly's coming from Facebook asking, is it true that a company can be under attack for months without anyone noticing? I mean, come on, seems a little dubious, right? Or is it?
The sad answer is yes.
I mean,
Sometimes years, by the
yeah,
way.
it gets a little crazy. Like, yeah, I've heard of ridiculous amounts of time that people have been in networks.
Like there was a web hosting provider who will go unnameless, but it rhymes with DoGaddy, that just released a report that they had been breached for like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
That threat actors had been running around inside there. Because here's the deal, right? Like if they're just stealing data, but they're not impacting your business, I don't know that it would be difficult probably to tell that apart from normal maintenance, right? Like normal, this person is supposed to be in here doing this work maintenance, right? And so that's kind of the problem. The Verizon data breach report, which is a really great report that's been going on for a while now. They're past 10 years. Are they at 15 already? I don't know. One of the few like sources of really good data about breaches. They focus a lot on the source of the breach, and then how the company was notified. And in a lot of the cases, I don't remember the exact top from 2022 off the top of my head, but most years what happens is like the time to compromise is measured in like hours and days, and then the time to discovery is measured in months. So there's this like it happens right away. The threat actors in there doing whatever they want to do. And the only reason that would probably go down recently is because most ransomware operators don't wait that long. They compromise, they poke around, they find fun stuff that they want to exfiltrate for later in case you don't pay the ransom to get your data back, and then they encrypt everything. And sometimes that happens really fast, like within 24 hours. Sometimes they're in there a little bit longer. We find out, but most of the time, but the threat actor's goal is things like espionage and simply access and using maybe your organization as a jumping off point for other attacks.
So
Yeah,
they're just going almost like you said, looking like a normal user. So
just
that's
looking
the
like a
kind of
normal
thing
user.
that's not going to get really picked up on anyone's radar.
Yeah.
Like you said, unless they're trying to go, oh, let's
I
double.
mean, the loud events are the stuff that happens right at the beginning, right? Like when
Right.
they gain that initial
Right.
access.
You
That's
did
where
something.
most
Right.
of the noise happens.
And
After
if they can
that,
slip past, and of course they like to employ those diversionary tactics as well. Hey, let's DDoS your web server while we're over here attacking X, Y, or Z server. And while you're trying to put that fire out, we slip right past and no one notices because it just gets lost in the fog of war. The fact
mhm.
that we were over here and now we're behind enemy lines going, yeah, I'll pass you a bucket. Put that
Yeah,
fire out. That's horrible.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Well, and now think about how many different remote access tools are available, right? Not
Mm,
let's not even talk about the ones that the company provides that if you get an account that you have access to, you can use those.
yep.
So the DFIR report, the Data Forensics Incident Response Report, which is a great resource. We sponsor them. We're big fans of them. They just had their 2022 year in review. Do you know what the number 2 command and control protocol or software was for 2022 for all these threat actors?
Oh, it's probably like LogMeIn or
It
something
was
dumb.
AnyDesk. Yeah, a
Yeah.
commercial tool that you would look at if you were like looking at software, like network traffic, like, oh yeah, that's got to be an admin doing something legit, right? It
Yeah.
is not,
Because
and it's just
it's
like,
normal traffic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So once they get in, once they gain access, that's probably where most of the loud stuff happens. Now, if they're poking around and like, making all kinds of weird, like they're trying to hit databases and try to do stuff and they're like brute forcing stuff on the inside, like why is this desk workstation
Yeah.
trying to brute force one of our data? Now that's loud and that might get
Yeah.
you in, but you don't always have the luxury of that. So yeah, they'll just hang out, kind of see what they see, maybe check the corporate intranet, see if anything interesting is happening.
Yeah. Throw a crypto miner on.
Oh
They
man.
do love those crypto miners, don't they?
There's a lot of stories that are both public and like anecdotal where like the only reason they figured out that they had a crypto miner was because of a crazy AWS bill. They're like,
Oh
"What?
yeah,
Well, how much money did
that's
we
a good
spend?"
way to figure
Because
it out.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, "Oh man." Well,
Yeah.
I guess however you detect it, you detect it, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I would much rather know it before the bill comes due, but
Yes.
hey,
Yes.
that's just me, and I'm a crazy guy, right? All right, speaking of crazy
Absolutely.
guys, we've got a question from Joseph, who I'm sure has an insane question for us, or just fun. He comes from YouTube. He's asking, "What are some jobs in cybersecurity that I could train for, where I would be the one helping detect these types of attacks?" Yeah, good question.
Oh, that's an awesome, awesome question. So, the obvious answer is if you can get into doing some kind of security operations center analyst work or threat hunter work. But the real answer probably, but the true like let's peel it back and let's talk about this some more is simply learning how these systems work so that you can identify unusual, right? Or wait, think about like how could I take advantage of this thing to do something that maybe it didn't and get intended for, right? So um I think when we talk about this with customers, the place that we recommend they look for a lot of folks that join their SOC analysts, frankly, as like junior folks,
Hmm.
are from like help desk and service desk kind of jobs, where you're starting to learn how to use technology. You kind of understand a little bit of like managing Windows endpoints, managing like Active Directory accounts, all that kind of stuff, and then you can work your way up from there. One thing that I'll say, I used to give like blanket advice that was. Um, Learn a scripting or coding language, learn how to use Wireshark. That's mostly so you learn how networking works, and then also learn how to use Linux systems. I would almost replace the Linux one now with sort of being like cloud conversant because most of that is like configuration as code kind of stuff, and you kind of get away from like a server that you're patching all the time because like that's the cloud provider's job, and your job is to configure all of the interactions with that service and with the code you put in it to work the way you want to. And there's a lot of folks in security who are much more familiar with like the firewall like moat around the castle scenario, and they're not as good at that. And so there's a lot of need for folks who can do that kind of work.
So
I
maybe
don't know. What do you
start
think,
picking
Daniel? I
up.
mean, you guys get asked this question, I'm sure, all the time. What do you
So
think?
I'm 100% with you. I tell people all the time about cloud. Cloud is like it's not like this fad thing that's kind of cool or whatever, and there's not a lot to it. This is how we run our data centers now. So you need to get familiar and comfortable with working in not just the web UI and going into there and doing administration and things of that nature, but working with the APIs and the CLIs that are available from these vendors so that you can effectively work with them. And then also you got to get really good at working with solutions like Kubernetes so that you can
Mhm.
start orchestration and doing DevOps and all the stuff that is now where maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, that was kind of like, oh, that's like a burgeoning thing, and it's not quite mature now. Now this the day the way that's where we live. You got to be able to work with that stuff. And people that ask me about security specifically, I'm like, go get like you. I think you just mentioned it a second ago. Get a job on the help desk. Get a job doing like junior cloud admin stuff. Go get you a couple of AWS certs or go get some Azure certs and get a job working doing some just junior cloud administration. And then every chance you get, go, I'm into security. I'm into security. I'm
Mhm.
into
Mhm.
security. I'm really into security. Plus, I want to learn more about the security side of how do we maintain security in our cloud environment. And now they're going, well, that's a good thing. Yeah, let me get you some training on that. Let me get you schooled up on that so you could start to help and tell us things that you're learning and you're training about. Right? And then everybody starts feeding off each other. Next thing you know, you're the cloud security admin because you're the one with all the cloud security training. and you are taking a management position, or you're working with a bunch of analysts and engineers doing all the cool stuff you've always hoped that you could do. And then if you're learning about the systems that are being deployed in cloud and still picking up like pen testing skills or SOC analyst skills, now you get to bring those into the mix. Okay, let's set up a seam, hook that into the cloud, and start monitoring, bring it all into our Splunk solution or whatever the case is. And I'm off to the races. You are now a full on security engineer, right? A cybersecurity
Mhm.
professional,
Mhm.
and you just start parlaying those skills into whatever job you want to do. So go where there's not a hot fire for like, if you want to be a pen tester, I get that. Everybody wants to be a pen tester, and you got to fight everybody to be a pen tester. And you got to like really make yourself stand head and shoulders above everybody else. That's hard to do. Being a cloud administrator where everybody needs a cloud admin at every
Mhm.
single stinking level is not as difficult to do because, well, there's a high demand and a low supply. So if
Mhm.
you this is like we're hackers, right? Hack your way into the job you're looking for by going through the side door. Don't go at the front gate where there's all sorts of like, well, I've got 600 resumes to go through because I got everybody and their brothers. I got to try hack me, top this
Mhm.
that percent. Not that those are bad, that you shouldn't be doing those, or that if you want to be a pen tester, you can't go after that. But what I'm saying is try the side door, go around the corner and see if there's any unlocked doors that will allow you to come in the back way that no one's standing at. It's an
Yeah.
easier way to get into the biz. I don't know. You tell me if I'm crazy or not, Ben.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. The other thing I'll say, you mentioned it about like just say like, hey, I'm really into security. Like even if you work on like the Windows endpoint team or whatever, like all the good security teams that I know, like the blue teams, rely on having folks in all of these other departments that they can rely on to help like move things along, right? So if you're working on like, the Windows server team or like a Linux admin team and you're interested in security, let the security team know, because if they're any good, they'll be like, yes, an ally in that team would be super helpful because whenever we need to figure out why a patch didn't get installed or if we can try this thing out, like they'll know to reach out to you. You get to work with them a lot more and you'll get to know and you'll get to see like what are they doing and stuff that's more interesting. So if they're jerks about it, then you probably don't want to stay there. I would start looking for a job at a different company where they're not jerks. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you're totally dead on. And so many of these things you can do either as part of those like hack the box type things or for free by yourself, because you can frequently get like a lot of these services for like Azure and AWS, you can run in like a free tier for yourself, right? Just make sure you turn them all off when you're done. You won't spend very much money at all, and you can learn it, right? I mean, that was the original part of my recommendations about learning Linux. Wasn't because I thought Linux was better. It was much cheaper. Like when I was coming up and doing a lot of this training, it was expensive to get Microsoft stuff, so I didn't have money for it. So I was like, can I do the equivalent in Linux? And so I just learned a lot of stuff there. The real reason I tell people to learn Linux because most of the stuff will have an error, and you have to get really good at reading error messages and log files. So, anyways,
Yeah, it is
total
fun. I
aside.
mean, Linux
Yeah.
is a kind of fun thing because of those things. It's really frustrating at first, but then it makes you learn. It kind of forces you to learn.
Yes.
I equate it to a car with a manual stick shift. For going through the gears, you got to get really good at figuring out how much throttle, how much brake, how much clutch, how much this and that. And it's really frustrating to begin with. But once you get used to it, you're like, oh, I couldn't go any other way. I need that control. I need that
And the-
connection with my machine. And speaking of Linux, we actually have a question from a Mr. Ken out there asking about Linux. He says, you don't want to replace Linux with Python or Bash. Interesting question. I'm trying to figure out exactly what he's trying to say there. You don't
I
want to
think
replace Linux with
he
Python
might
or
be referring to my very quick run through of like the scripting language. Okay, great. All
ah,
right, so let's do this for real then, so
okay.
we get all the confusion. There are three things I recommend people do if they want to have a career, especially in cybersecurity. Number one, learn a programming language of some kind. It doesn't have to be you don't have to become a full-on developer. It doesn't have to be C sharp. It could be PowerShell or Python. It can be Bash. There's a lot of stuff you can do in Bash scripting, especially if you are familiar with Linux. But the whole purpose of that is to figure out how to write some code so that you can both automate simple things for yourself and you can understand if you see other written code. My blanket recommendation used to be Python, but PowerShell is awesome. My recommendation now is if you use a Windows computer as your main computer, probably start with PowerShell. If you use a Mac or Linux as your main computer, then if you use Linux as your main computer, this topic is not for you. But if you use Mac, Python's built in. It used to be Python 2. I think it's Python 3 now, so you're good. I would learn those because those both let you like operate on the command line. So you can try one thing at a time. You can write a script and run through the script, and then you can build like full tools out of all of those, right? But once you get familiar writing with any of those, especially PowerShell, like you'll be able to pick up other languages and at least follow through. So if you're reading a proof of concept for some weird code that does an exploit, and you can like, what is this going to do before I run it? You at least can like follow along, right? So that was number one. So
Well,
I would not recommend, getting rid of the Linux stuff. Number two was to be able to take and read a packet capture, probably with a tool like Wireshark or Packet Miner or something like that. But the whole point of doing that is simply so you can demonstrate that you understand how networks work, right? And this is even more important today. It used to be like within a data center, you'd have to figure out when an app didn't work and we were accessing it from an endpoint. A lot of times the answer is in the packet capture, right? We used to have a rule when I ran a security team for a service provider that packet capture didn't happen, right? Like that's where the answer is. So don't come to us with a problem if we have it. Like I said this to my internal team. I didn't say this to customers. So anyways, do that so you can understand like what the difference between the TCP layer and the IP layer and how those things work so you can start troubleshooting, understand where DNS plays into everything, right? So super duper important. And even more so in the cloud connected world where everything is just APIs anyways. Super helpful. If you can do that, you'll have a major leg up on a lot of folks you might be competing against. And the third thing used to be, and sort of still is like get familiar with Linux. Again, not because Linux is better, because it will invariably give you some kind of an error and you will have to read log files, you have to read error messages, you'll have to try to figure stuff out. It also gets you familiar with doing a lot of like crazy command line stuff, which is usually helpful in a lot of places. It'll even make you better at Windows now that they offer like, Windows headless servers, all that stuff. So I think I would sort of bridge the cloud Linux thing. I think it would be fine. A lot of cloud services are running on Linux servers anyways. So I guess maybe, if you want to do anything like Kubernetes, all this container stuff, that's all Linux, right? So that would be my advice to folks is getting started. So once you have those base skills, now we're just talking about the mindset of like, how could this be misused, right? Or how could I get around if the purpose is this, how can I get around it, right? That's a lot of what my job, frankly, is when customers hire us, they come in and be like, this is the way this is supposed to work. Are there ways you can make it not do that, right? That we would be interested in and maybe figuring that out.
well, you heard it here first, folks. Ben Fink, right from the horse's mouth. He's telling you great strategies for getting yourself into cybersecurity if that's what you're trying to do, and skills that just continue to pay out in dividends as you build your cybersecurity career, as you've gotten into it and are still continuing on up that ladder. These things do not go away. And the more you know about all three of those things, the better you're going to be at your job. Now, we've run out of time for this episode. Honestly, Ben and I could probably go on for days on just these very topics. But, well, you know what? We can't do that, unfortunately. We have to sleep from time to time. And I'm sure you do as well. But Ben, thanks so much for joining us today, man. I always appreciate when you stop by and hang out with us, answer cool questions that the folks out there are just dying to know. And we know that you've got the skinny on that stuff. So we really appreciate getting your input on that. Anything that you want to tell the people where you're going to be, anything upcoming with On Defend that they can come hang out with you, or something that's pertinent to On Defend that you might want to throw out there before we head out?
Sure. Yeah. So we've got a bunch of stuff happening. We're going to be hosting a few more webinars coming up. So we'll definitely be broadcasting that stuff on our social channels and stuff. We're going to have some folks at Hack Space Con coming up here in April down at Kennedy Space Center. That should be a ton of fun. So really looking forward to that. We are going to be doing some other events later this summer. We'll get those out there. I've got the article series going on in Forbes right now, and we're always keeping stuff. Some fun nuggets, things that the team comes up with on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. So we'd be happy to see folks follow us there.
Well, that's really cool, man. I look forward to seeing you at Hackspace Con because I will be there as well. So awesome. Thanks so much for stopping by. And thanks to you out there for everybody for watching. Guess what? We got an all things cybersecurity coming up this very month on the 16th with Mike Saunders from Red Siege. So you definitely got to check that out. The man is a beast, a legend in the field. So if you want to learn a little bit about cybersecurity from someone who is doing malware analysis and creating C2 and doing all sorts of really fun stuff in the pen testing space, then you need to drop by and hang out with us and ask your questions there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Well, looks like we are at the end of this episode. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, have a great day.